How are you tonight, sir?
Oh, Jesse just said live in 15. Apparently, I'm doing very well. Thanks. I don't know why I'm quite talking or talking quieter right now. Like that's people aren't going to know. Now we're live. Okay. Okay. Welcome to Hopeifers. It's Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and you know what that means. Brother Scott Sweetman has some insights to share that we will discuss for the next 30 to 45 minutes. Thank you for joining us here. Also, before we even start that, Scott, I've been having a strange occurrences.
What's
I've
that?
been having people call me with odd requests. I had a young woman call me that she couldn't make it to court on time. She's supposed to be there at 10:30, but she couldn't make it because she was anyways, so I helped her solve her problem. And then I
Right?
had a person who needed a wheelchair van, and I talked
Right.
to, and I helped them solve their problem. Now today I had a new call, so I'm looking for somebody else who wants to help me with this. This is Danielle. Danielle needs to go to Calgary for a medical analysis, a medical assessment on July
Okay.
19th. And she has to be there at 9 a.m. and then basically come back later that same day. So maybe you are going to Calgary on July 19th. Maybe you said, "Hey, I'll go just for the heck of it, just because I want to meet Danielle and help her." Wouldn't that be something? So if you're interested in helping with that, if you're going to Calgary on July 19th, you know that, and you want to help out a fellow human being with something, then let me know. Yeah, my cell phone's right there. Text me or call me, and then we'll connect the two of you, and you'll be able to help Danielle, and you'll meet somebody new, and you'll feel so good for helping her. Okay,
Excellent.
Scott.
That's great news, Al. So the universe is throwing things at you.
Exactly. Exactly. So apparently, I'm, there's the belief that I can help people, so I should get at it here. So come on,
Well,
bring it
I
on.
I believe that. So I think the universe is doing the right thing, throwing it your way for sure. So
Excellent.
maybe we'll help Danielle get a ride. First, I have to apologize to everyone. If you're looking at your screen, I haven't been beat up. I was volunteering on the weekend down at the Lethbridge Fish and Game shooting facility, and you would think at my age your brain would work properly, but I sat out all day without a hat on, and it was overcast, right? So I didn't ever really feel the sun until I got home, and my face was bright red. And as you can tell, like under my eyes, my nose, my forehead is burnt quite badly. The worst sunburn I've had in maybe 15 years. So yeah, do not adjust your set. I didn't get beat up or something on the weekend or fall off my motorcycle. I merely was an idiot and got sunburned. So take care of your skin, folks. It's important. Don't
Well,
abuse
I
it like
think
I
you
did.
will survive this error in judgment, will you not, Mr. Sweetman?
I will. I will. It's especially pointed though, as I mentioned before, my father died from skin cancer that he got while working with his shirt off many years on the farm, and he got skin cancer on his back and got into his lymph system and eventually killed him. But so yeah, I should know better, right? I should be a public service announcement for wearing a hat, wearing sunscreen, and the sun's good for you, but not in massive, unfiltered doses. But yes, I will survive. I
You know
will once
what?
again.
I was listening to this guy earlier this week. His name's Zach Bush, Dr. Zach Bush, and he does not use sunscreen. He knows the
Mhm.
value of the sun, that you have to be in it, but basically he thinks sunscreen is putting chemicals over top of your skin, and your skin's been designed to interact with the atmosphere and with the sun. But he has a big thing about, especially about being prudent with sun use and protecting yourself and wearing hats and all those kind of good things, right? But he's also to stimulate your body's waking up response and your healing response. And that he talks about in the morning, to go outside with as little clothes as you could possibly have, and just get some sun and air on your naked parts on you. Yes. So I've been doing that. I think it's a great practice. I'm not so sure if
Luckily, you
Aaron
live
has.
out in the country and you don't
Yeah.
have neighbors right there. I
Exactly.
think I would have the police at my door rather quickly if I tried that. My neighbors are rather close here and probably wouldn't appreciate my morning routine. But that's good. Yeah, no, I can definitely see. There's a lot of traditions where being outside uh, and in the fresh air and in the sun is part of a healing ritual. And
Mhm.
I know that that for many years exposing injuries to the sun was one of the main ways of healing, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, for sure. Just too much of anything is a bad thing. And I was reminded of that on the weekend, and I'll
Well,
have about a week.
and is it fair statement that our atmosphere with what how thin our atmosphere is, that solar exposure is more harmful now than it was in the past? Is that a fair statement? I think so.
Oh, I definitely, I think scientifically that's quite provable.
Yes.
And we have a lot of, because of the greenhouse effect, there's a lot more radiation bouncing around that's sort of trapped in our atmosphere.
Right.
So normally it would have bounced and gone back into space, but now heat and solar radiation get trapped in our atmosphere, and just creates a warmer, more radiation filled situation. So yeah,
Scott, I think
definitely.
I have been a distractive effect on our show today. You have a system, you have a topic. Lament is what we are here to talk about. And I know I thought it's just lament is just like more of a poetic way to express grief or something. But I know I'm going to learn something. So carry on there, brother Scott. What is our lesson
Well,
for today?
this came out of our three-part series, and
Yes.
when I started looking at dealing with grief, one of the things that kept coming up was lament. And it's a word that doesn't get used often. You're right. We think of it synonymously as grieving or sorrow, and it is those things. But really, what it means is the strong outpouring, usually with sounds or actions, of sorrow, grief, loss, and it's very physical.
Right.
It's not just feeling sad. It's releasing that sadness. And that's really important when we start talking about its therapeutic effect. And
Wow, you know
what
what? This Scott, I got to jump in here. I have a friend, a guy
Mhm,
who is, certainly would be very much a stoic type of a guy, right? He
mhm,
lost his wife a couple years ago. I went to the funeral, and the sounds that came out of that man, like it was like an animal that has been stabbed. Like it was
mhm.
it. That is now I get it now. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and it was just so. I don't think I'd ever experienced that before. Somebody who was so expressive in their grief, and it was heart-wrenching, right, to hear him make those sounds and just be so broken, right? So yeah.
Well, there's you just what you said there is so much of what we're going to talk about tonight, all packed into one, because we talk about the man box, and traditionally and historically, men sort of pushed our lamenting, farmed it out, if you will, to women. So men aren't allowed to lament in our culture in the same way that women are. We see it as something, as a weakness. We're supposed to keep it inside. We're supposed to be, as you said, stoic or reserved in our expression of grief. But everything I looked at said that good mental health, good emotional health, involves grieving your losses and disappointments, and not wallowing in despair or feeling sorry for yourself, but move through that grief and experience it and let it out. And that's how we regain balance and mental health, and restore our emotional balance.
You
And
know what?
so
Speaking of that, probably some people when sometimes when people grieve, they're subject to a lot of um kind of what they think people think of their grieving, that they didn't love enough, if they don't grieve enough, that that what I'm saying, that there's a judgment
mhm.
about their grief. And if you think about it, who knows how to do this experience until you have this experience, right? You have to figure out how it is for you to express this, and don't be worried about comparing it with somebody else. It's your experience, your feelings. You're the one who has to process. So it's yours. It like accept it and feel it.
That that's true. Although historically we have codified it, and in our modern history, I know that when I was an undergraduate, I studied death and dying and the ars moriendi, the art of dying well. And a lot of my friends who experience grief, or family, or friends passing away during university, came to me in confidence and say, what am I supposed to do? And a lot of cultures have strict rules. In Japan, there's a formula that you use. Formula is sevens: 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 months, 7 years, and it's prescribed what you do at each of these times, who does what, what's a permissible amount of time to grieve. And when
Well,
I was looking back,
unpack that,
sorry,
Scott. Unpack that. Seven. So, what do you do at 7 days? What do you do at 7 weeks? So, what do you do at 7 months?
yeah, I want to be careful because my experience was the death of my best friend in Japan's father. And so when he first passed away, there was a period of waiting, and then his funeral was held, and then he was cremated, and then his ashes were brought back to the house. And I apologize for if I get this wrong, but
Okay.
this is my memory, not an
Right.
academic reaccounting. It's a personal experience. And so his ashes were brought back to the house in a family shrine that was in the most important room. So a traditional Japanese house has a nook with a special kind of wood pillar, and there's nothing above that. So on every floor, there's not a toilet, there's not a bathtub, a dining table. So if you will, there's a column above that space of sacred space. So the spirit is connected with that shrine, and nothing, there's floor and ceiling and things above it, but nothing that would impede the spirit. So the family prays, and there's times and prayers and things they have to do there. And then in this, and it's sets of seven, and I'm really sorry, I don't remember the exact sets, but there's there's maybe 7 days of prayer, and then the remains, or 7 months, 7 weeks, again I don't remember, but in a prescribed amount of time, then the remains are moved to the family um, tomb. uh, it's sort of like our gravestones, but it's accessible, and the remains of generations are put in this tomb. And then so they're required to go back and pray at certain times as a family. They're kept clean. It usually falls to the family of the oldest son, usually the oldest son's wife, I think. But all of these are societal and cultural rules. So
Hmm.
everyone knows these rules who's part of that culture. And if you don't follow the rules, people know. But I talked about it with them, and I know that deaths in my own family, and I was fortunate that I'd studied death and dying. Is often nowadays, death is consigned to a professional. We allocate it so that we don't have to directly experience it. So often we don't ever see the body after the moment of death. The body is taken away, it's cared for by other people, it's prepared by other people, the grave is dug by other people if they're going to be interned, or they're cremated. We might see the body again if there's an open casket funeral, although that's becoming less and less popular. Viewings and open casket funerals are becoming less the norm. And a priest or a minister or an officiate of some kind holds the ceremony, and the family's interaction is really quite limited. And I know that when I was young, there was always a wake or a reception back at the family's home, where there was refreshments and people talked. On the Irish side of the family, it was more of a party where they sort of rejoiced and celebrated the life. On my English side of the family, it was more a social, quiet, sort of subdued gathering of reverence and those things. But more and more that doesn't occur.
Right. You
There's a
in
service
back
that's held.
Yeah, back
Go
in the
ahead.
day for sure, you would have been very engaged in death, right? Death was something real and personal. It wasn't something sanitized and sterilized that happened somewhere else. It happened right in your home, right? And you'd have
Absolutely.
you'd have somebody come, the funeral director would come to your home, and they'd be that, it wasn't neat and tidy, kind of like it is now. But then also, do you experience the grief the same way? Maybe not, right? I mean, I guess if you, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
The research says no, that we're maybe missing out on an opportunity of healing here. And so I know in a number of religious traditions, bathing the body by family members is important. There's many traditions where a family member stays with the body for a prescribed period of time because it's believed the soul is still resident in the body or could be in a transitional state, and they don't want to leave their loved one with a stranger during that time. And there's other traditions. Again, I know on the Irish side of my family that digging the grave back in Ireland, the family would actually dig the grave. It wouldn't be left to some, backhoe. Although, and I don't even know if we have that option now. I think, like in the city of Lethbridge, when my father passed away, um, it was just paid for. It was part of the service. I don't know if we had that. And then, I've been to funerals where people are allowed to throw a handful of dirt on top of the coffin, where that used to be the family covered up the casket or the vault or whatever the person was in. So steadily we see, as you said, sort of farming out of grief and death. And psychologists, when I went through it, almost universally agree that it's really important to grieve, and it's really important to experience that. And Esther Fleece in her book "No More Faking," uh, fine, Fine, so ending the pretending. There is no healing in hurrying through grief. There is no restoration in ignoring pain. Rather, healing can be found when we learn to lament honestly. And that really echoes almost exclusively everything that I read about lament and grief, and my own historical studies. If we go as far back as the Greeks, if you look at Greek tragedies, which a lot of times art mirrors, even if we don't know about the rituals of a particular culture, often if we look at the funerary objects that are left behind, or in the Greeks' case, the tragedy plays and things like this, we get a good idea of what they were doing in real life, although perhaps exaggerated or whatever.
Sure.
Um, and even at that time, women again were encouraged to lament, uh, usually for the entire family, and that was considered a process of healing. I just watched the TV adaptation of a very popular science fiction book called The Wheel of Time, and in it they have these men who protect the women who channel magic. They're called warders, and one of them is killed. And at the funeral, they select his best friend, and his best friend laments. He tears open his shirt and screams and yells and lets all of the pain and anger out, while the other men stand around and watch him.
Hmm.
And so symbolically, that's historical. Often in cultures, there are someone that's allowed to fully express their grief physically and emotionally with sound, and just to let all of that pain release for everyone in
Hmm.
their culture. But again, going back to the lamenting, the positive effects of lamenting, psychologists really believe that lamenting is natural. It's something that we've sort of trained out of our experience. If you want to blame the sort of waspy culture or the Victorians, or sort of pick whatever group you want to blame for this, but we have gotten to the point where lamenting isn't part of private life. in terms of private funerals. But I did come across a really interesting article that in the protests for Black Lives Matter that we've seen recently and other events, we see a communal lamenting. And I thought that was really, really interesting to put those in that perspective. And they were talking about how these uh, Sarah Everand, which is a professor, psychologist, and researcher, she cites these examples of community lament to help face the reality of injustice and sit in pain with those who are most affected. So, we see usually a member of the family and then people from the community coming out, loud noises, physical sharing of pain and frustration and anger. Have you ever been in a situation of a group experiencing that, Al?
No, I have not. No, have you, Scott?
I have, yes. When I was studying at Cambridge, when I was in England, there was a
Hmm.
serial killer in London killing gay men very
Oh,
brutally. In one, the I'm not where, not Soho, but where most of the theater and arts areas are in London.
okay.
And Fleur and I were doing something downtown, and we heard all this commotion and what looked like a parade. And so Fleur said, "Oh, let's go." So we took off, and we came around a corner, and we found ourselves in this huge, massive group of people that were not a parade. They were demonstrating and protesting because they believed the police hadn't done enough because it was the gay community. They hadn't done enough to find the killer, and
Hmm.
gay men were afraid for their lives because the serial killer, I can't remember how many, but we were caught in this, didn't know what was happening. People were yelling and screaming, and they were angry and they were sad, and the emotion was so overwhelming, and there was thousands of people there. It was not at all small, and I've never experienced anything like it ever in my life, and it caught us off guard. The crowd was pushing us along. I mean, we weren't in danger. No one wanted to hurt us.
I gotta say that does sound a little bit scary though. Like, to be, you're not part of that collective. You're just like kind of inserted in it, and then, it would not be a comfortable place. You wouldn't think. A lot of, with that much negative emotion and hypercharged type people around you, right? That you're not connected to, right?
Well, during my research, and it's really interesting that this came up, is that lamenting is good, but historically, if it becomes connected to the feelings of vengeance, it turns into something that's unacceptable.
Yeah,
And
sure.
right, and so vengeance comes when we're looking for blame. So
Right,
instead of experiencing just grief, and that was part of this protest. So there was a lot of people that were just sad and scared, but there was also people that were looking for vengeance. They
right.
blamed the police for not, treating their community like they would any other community. They believed they weren't taking appropriate action to protect them or to find the killer. And psychologists and historically, and there's a lot of plays, Shakespeare, the Greek tragedies, when vengeance enters into the lament, it becomes something quite dark and not healing, and in fact can be dangerous.
Hmm.
And during the Middle Ages, they created laws limiting lamenting,
Oh,
for
really?
exactly that reason. Yes, they did,
So that it
because they
wouldn't
felt that.
manifest as so that it wouldn't become where it manifests as the as vengeance, and then the acts of violence because of the vengeance. Is that
Right. So
right?
you could imagine, yes, you can imagine, a community finds a young dead person, for example, and it's apparent this person has fallen afoul of some foul play, and they're all grieving and upset and gathered together and lamenting, yelling and screaming, and the emotion is raw and real, and then it turns to who did this, and then somebody's name gets mentioned, and then the name gets mentioned louder, and the crowd starts to focus on that name, or perhaps, as the case in the demonstration we were in, on the police or the magistrate. And suddenly that crowd is not in mourning, they're out for vengeance. And that can be the dark side of grief, is when it starts to be about blame and finding fault rather than experiencing grief in a cathartic way.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah,
Cool.
I know that often when we experience loss, we try to find a reason for it.
Right.
Don't you think most people do?
Sure.
I
Yeah.
know
Like,
I
I
do.
mean, even, I lost my sister during COVID, and it was a unusual time. You couldn't, well, like, there is no normal way to kind of say goodbye to somebody, but I did not say goodbye to her like I would have liked to have. And it's
Mhm.
I don't know if I've grieved for that correctly, because there was like no funeral, no, she passed away, and nothing ever happened, kind of a thing, right? We got together, had chats over Zoom about it, and that kind of a thing. Yeah, so I am no expert on grief by any means, that's for sure.
No, but certainly, and I would guess that in that situation, you start to think, well, did we really have to be locked down? Really, couldn't my family get together? Not that I'm saying you thought that, but certainly I think it's normal for humans to say, why couldn't I do this, or why couldn't we grieve normally? And it's important that grief and lamenting remains about expressing your own pain, and
Right.
and moving through that. Uh, so looking at lament in its therapeutic ways, there's just a little quote, and it said, "Lament is a comma, not a full stop." And that's how lamenting is different than other forms of, especially pretending. Often, we're taught, especially as men, to hold it in, don't cry. Maybe you're allowed to cry at your mother's funeral, maybe, um, or your
One tear.
child.
One tear.
Yeah, that's it. A friend, you're to pat everyone in the back, sort of, oh yeah, okay, oh, good guy, and move on, right? And that's that pretending. And what happens is that becomes a full stop, so that grief gets stuck in us,
Hmm.
and it never allows us to heal fully. And so the articles and the psychologists and everyone that I was reading said that lament is restorative and resounding, and it's grief expressed, this, I love this word, psychobiologically, and I've never heard of that word.
Psychobiologically. Mm.
Yes,
Mhm.
verbally, musically, and metaphorically. So
Nice.
I think that that's a great way to understand how hope comes from lament, how lament can help turn grief into a restorative, resounding experience.
Right. 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 I think I understand. The connection you're saying is basically with the full ability to grieve fully, then hope is restored. Is that kind of the what you're saying?
Yes, and that
Yeah.
we can move. It's a comma. So we pause, we experience this, we accept the mortality, we accept the loss, the passing, but we're able to move through it. But
Right.
if we don't move through it, it becomes that full stop period. And our emotions get stuck in, I can't think about it, I can't talk about it, I can't express it, and that's not healthy. Certainly from what I read and went through.
So to our
Um,
viewers, for sure, basically want you to know that basically there is no one template. It's your feelings, your emotions. You figure out how it goes, and ask for help, ask for support. Tell people how you're feeling. Tell people that this is hard for me, and that's totally fine. That's great.
that's a great segue, Al, because one of the benefits of lamenting, and it was a pastor who's done a lot of research into biblical lamenting and psychological benefits for mental health. And when you lament, when you let out that pain, you're letting people know that it's okay to grieve with you. You're letting
Mm,
people know that you will accept their help and their togetherness, their sharing. By
mm,
sharing your pain, you allow people in. And he was talking about, not talking, but in his writing, he was talking about how often when if we go to a griefful situation and everyone's quiet and there's no visible signs of grief, that leaves friends and visitors without a feeling that they can participate. They
mm.
know they're observers,
They just
but
don't
they're
have.
not really.
They don't have permission. Is what they don't feel they have
e-
permission. Yeah.
exactly right. And I know that when my grandmother died, the family was given a room. So we didn't sit with the rest of the people at the memorial. We had a room so our crying and our emotions couldn't be seen by the visitors.
Hmm.
And that was popular for some time. It may still be popular in some places. And so the visitors sort of filed in. They went up to my grandmother's coffin and they filed out again. But I can understand this pastor's view exactly as you said. By lamenting, it's giving permission for people to lament on their own, or to put their arm around us and say, I feel your pain, or
Mm,
just to be there with us, but in a
sure.
real present kind of way.
I can't remember exactly how the phrase goes, but it's with friends, joys are doubled and griefs are halved, right? Sorrows are cut in half and joys are doubled because you both, feel that energy, feel that you both share in that. So yeah.
One of the things that we talk about, and I promise to include this because it's so dear to you, is the power of music. And lamenting, in a lot of religious traditions, in the Bible, it's the Psalms. I read a lot how the Psalms were originally supposed to be sung. They
Mm,
weren't meant to be recited; they were actually meant to be sung. And there's a revival of that because music has, quote end quote, manifold powers to proclaim and to recall and to console and to unite and to articulate that feeling
yeah.
that we
Yeah.
have.
Yes. Beautifully said. Yeah.
And I would agree with that. I was listening to one of my daughter's playlists recently, and I thought, boy, there's a lot of sad music in here. Like my music's kind of ba ba da ba da ba. Because when I listen to music, I'm usually working, or I listen to your show because you're singing and happy, and I'm working away, and the mood's good. And I said to her, I said, hey, how come you listen to all this depressing music? And she's like, depressing? What do you mean depressing music? And I said, well, no, this playlist here. She says, that's not depressing. And I'm like, yeah, but it's all about being sad and, breaking up and loss. And she said, oh, well, when I'm feeling down, I can listen to that music and I know that those feelings, I'm not alone in that, and I feel better
Hmm.
afterwards.
All
So
right.
she said, to me, I feel better after
Hmm.
listening to those songs.
Just that she's
And
not alone in those thoughts. Okay. Hmm.
yeah, and somehow I think it allows people to share it. I'm not a big fan of sad movies. I kind of like my movies to be either fanciful or uplifting, right? Like old enough is my speed, right? But I've got friends that love sad movies, and afterwards they find it very cathartic. They find that they've gone through that pain with the person, or imagined that pain, or had empathy with that pain and suffering and lamenting,
Hmm.
and afterwards they feel better. When you
So,
sing a sad song, how do you feel?
oh, I can get sad singing a sad song. I have one sad song that's by Matt Minglewood. I have started crying when I sang it before because
Yeah,
it's just like it starts about a boy losing a dog. Well, we've all had that experience, right? And so if you
yeah,
start thinking about the first time you had to say goodbye to your furry friend because he was out of years, that was a pretty sad day. And when I
yeah.
start singing that song, sometimes that comes back to me as, oh man. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got a few. Three Wooden Crosses by Randy Travis.
Oh, that's a sad song. Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
that's a hard song to
I
sing,
always,
and yes.
yeah, beautiful though, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
beautiful. It's
and
just hard to sing because I cry.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a great Christmas song called "And the Angels Cried." Do you know
Oh,
that
okay.
one?
Not familiar.
Yeah, and it's about how the angels knew Christ's destiny. And so when
I
he was born, the angels cried because they knew what was coming. They knew
got
about
it.
the trial, the tribulation, the crucifixion. And so the whole song is about, although we rejoice at Christmas, the birth of Christ, the angels cried because they knew what Christ the man was going to suffer through on our
Understood.
behalf.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
so
Very cool.
yeah, I had never thought about it until I heard the song that way, of course. And
Yeah,
lots of people don't believe in angels and Christ and all those things, but those of us that do, catch you right here, and you're like, yeah. So,
that's
but I think most people actually, if you have a good cry or you let it out, even if I grew up in farmers, and sometimes you'd see grandpa or dad out walking in the field, and grandma or mom would say, yeah, just leave grandpa alone or just leave dad
mm,
alone. And it wasn't until I had my own need to go walk in the field that I understood that
figure that.
they were that they were out there lamenting to God, or nature, or the divine being, or the wind, or the rain, or whatever pain they had inside, they were letting that out.
And they were
And
going to let somebody see that happen, and that nobody could
no,
watch that. That's for sure. So yeah.
no, and that did come through in two ways, that historically men have appointed women to lament for them. And often that it falls upon, in a lot of traditional societies, the mother to bear the burden of lamenting. So she has to deal with her own loss, but she also has to lament and suffer for the men in the family, brothers, father, grandfather. And young girls are expected to share in that and support their mother in that.
Mm,
And so some of the articles I was reading was talking about how that, even though lamenting is a positive experience, when it becomes thrust upon you as a responsibility, and you're expected to show a certain amount of grief for people who aren't allowed to show it, then it really complicates the process.
sure. No, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of culture and situations that could complicate this, but everything I read came down to, when you feel loss and you feel sadness, letting it out is good. Keeping it in is bad.
Definitely. You gave the example of crying, right? So crying releases cortisol, right? Cortisol is very harmful for us, but crying releases that. So right there, huge, huge shift in our biological functioning by getting rid of that cortisol, right? Allowing that to release.
Well, and lament is like ugly crying.
Mhm.
And most people understand. It's like you said about your friend. It's not that this is sad.
No.
It's
Yeah.
that gut wrenching, I can no longer stand on my own 2 feet. I'm barely able to draw a breath,
Yeah.
sorrow,
Yeah.
and a very animalistic, very powerful,
Mhm.
very, very natural.
Yeah.
And it was talking about, and I think we're seeing this in our culture now, and here in Lethbridge, I think we see it too, is that when we try and hide those feelings, we often turn to things to numb the pain:
Mhm.
alcohol,
Mhm.
drugs, self-abuse, etc., etc.,
Mhm.
etc.
Hey, even foods that are not good for you, right? But that give you a hit of sugar or a hit of salt, right? That are if you know that they're not going to be favorable for your health, but you do it because it takes you away from that, right? That experience you don't want to be in. So,
No, and some of the stuff I was reading was talking about how traditional cultures, Aboriginal cultures, for example, had very strong traditions of lamenting and dealing with grief and loss
Hmm.
and sorrow and pain, and that was taken away from them. And with our culture too, I mean, it was taken away largely from men. Often it was thrust on women. Now it's just universally not acceptable for people to start wailing and crying and rending of sackcloth at funerals. But there was a very strong correlation between trying to contain all of that pain at loss and frustration. And the more people tried to contain it, the more they turned to substance abuse or violence, domestic abuse, lashing out at other people to try and deal with that pain. And one of the solutions that the lament therapy looks at, and there's companies or doctors that offer it in Calgary. I believe there's even a couple here in Lethbridge when I looked it up that offer lament therapy or grief therapy, and it's to sort of head off those negative responses to grief that often people have. And grief is big. It's not just about death. It's about loss, frustration. It can be not getting a job that you believe that you were the right person for. It can be, losing, a one-sided love, or uh, really anything that causes us to feel that pain. Everyone I read said letting it out, not having a continual pity party, right? Like just wallowing in it endlessly. And often a sign of that was not ever really letting it out, just sort of letting a little bit of it out constantly isn't healthy either.
Hmm.
Uh, that you should let the grief out as you feel it, experience it in a genuine way, and allow yourself to move through it.
My friends at LFS, Lethbridge Family Services, often say, heal it, feel it, heal it, and move on. Feel it, heal it, move on. Have those emotions, fully have them. They're part of being a human being. If you're a man, you don't have to rely on a woman to grieve for you or to feel sad for you or to cry. You can do all those things all by yourself. Like, seriously, you can do it.
And you'll be better for it.
Yeah.
Everything. Like, go on, read the journals. I found myself downloading academic journals. There's been a lot of research on this. Like, some of the
Yeah.
things we talk about are sort of on the fringe of science. This is firmly in the realm of science, that in terms of mental health, in terms of dealing with things, in terms of regaining hope after a loss, experiencing it, letting yourself move through it is the only pathway. There is no other cure.
I think that is a beautiful way to close tonight's session there, Brother Scott. Well said. To our viewers, come and join us next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about. Scott knows probably. Maybe by next week he'll know. And then we'll have a great conversation about that. Thanks for joining us. Look, hey, if you can help our friend Danielle, let me know about a trip to Calgary for her, okay? Keep well.
If you need help, sorry, I was going to say, if you need help dealing with some grief or lamenting or letting it out, and you found yourself turning to alcohol, drugs, abuse, who should they call, Al?
211 is the 24/7. You call them up and they got people that know how to help you to assist you. So, okay?
Give them a
Call if you
call.
need some help.
Don't be alone.
No, do not. See ya.
Take care.